Here's a bulletin from CBS News.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Boy. For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
Tonight, the most trusted man in America has died.
Good evening from the CBS News Control Center in New York. This is Walter Cronkite.
Words do you have trouble pronouncing?
You can laugh over it. Oh, that's the way it is. Or sardonic, that's the way it is. You know, or sad, well, that's the way it is.
That's the way it is. Thursday, January 15th, 1981, the 439th day of captivity for those American hostages in Iran.
Tonight, the way it was, remembering Walter Cronkite.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
For one last time, the voice of Walter Cronkite introduces this broadcast. Good evening, everyone. We are sorry to tell you, if you haven't heard by now, that our friend and colleague died today. He was 92. His unmistakable, unforgettable voice brought generations of Americans some of the most momentous events of the 20th century. From the tragic assassination of a president to the triumphant landing on the moon. Television news came of age with Walter Cronkite in the anchor chair.
And that's the way it is. And that's the way it is.
And that's the way it is. That's the way it is.
For half a century, Walter Cronkite told it the way it was, delivering the news straight and unvarnished.
Evening, everyone. Here is the news.
Among the pioneers who built television news from the ground up, he forged a special bond with audiences. Trustworthy, plain-spoken, unflappable.
And you were there.
Walter was there. He had lived the history of the century and reported it. Born in 1916 in St. Joseph, Missouri. As a young man growing up in Houston and Kansas City, he saw firsthand the Dust Bowl of the 1930s and the Great Depression. As a young wire service reporter in World War II, he hit the ground with troops in North Africa and was the first to make it back with the story.
I'm just back from the biggest assignment that any American reporter could have so far in this war.
He was all of 26, a natural before the camera and the microphone. He covered the Nuremberg war crime trials, sitting just a few feet from the Nazi architects of the Holocaust.
Some of them were sniveling. Gosh, you couldn't stand them. Stryker, Jew baiter, terrible man. He wanted to get up there and personally cut his throat. Hess was obviously mad as a hatter. Absolutely insane.
In the early 1950s, television came calling. Walter anchored the news on CBS, first in Washington, then on the network from New York. As television began taking wing in the 1950s, so did Walter, covering the coronation of Queen Elizabeth.
She's to be crowned Britain's sixth reigning queen.
An atomic device.
Atom bomb testing in Nevada, the birth of the American space program.
Fire at the apogee to raise the perigee.
Walter knew 12 American presidents.
I've met all of America's presidents since Herbert Hoover, and I've known some of them pretty well. Lyndon Johnson called the CBS Evening News while I was actually on the air and insisted that they put him through to me on the air. The secretary said, but he's on the air, Mr. President. I don't give a damn where he is. Put him on the phone.
He assumed the anchor chair of the evening news in 1962.
Good evening from the CBS News Control Center in New York. This is Walter Cronkite reporting.
Supreme Court today legalized abortion.
A flurry of activity at the Jack Ruby trial.
The risk of a meltdown at the 3 Mile Island atomic power plant.
And he was with us during America's darkest moments.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
And I almost lost it there.
Walter Cronkite was the person who connected us all on that day.
Walter became not only everybody's anchor man, he was everybody's minister, priest, and rabbi. He calmed America down.
The day of ultimate mourning as the body of
The late President John Fitzgerald Kennedy is laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery.
The finality of it overwhelmed me. Up to then, there was a nightmare quality as the developments piled one on the other. This said, it's all true. It had happened, it was over, it was done. And we were about to bury it, bury something of our past along with that man. John, salute him. Tough day. Anchormen shouldn't cry.
There has been a display of naked violence in the streets of downtown Chicago. The witness to that Hilton violence...
Cronkite was a fixture at political conventions, including the Democrats' chaotic meeting in Chicago in 1968, a party in a country at war with itself over Vietnam. Walter's skepticism grew while reporting on the Vietnam War. He shared those feelings in a landmark broadcast in which he acknowledged he was stating his opinion that it was time for the nation to withdraw.
But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
After that report, I recall that LBJ said to many of us that if I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost the war.
And I think it pained him to have to say what he thought about Vietnam. But he also understood how isolating the White House can be and how people can get to the point where they don't hear discordant voices. And he thought he knew what the truth was, and he thought he had an obligation to tell it.
This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
It is remarkable that one anchorman, one reporter, one journalist, whatever, could really affect the political fate of the country. But they didn't call Walter the most trusted man in America for nothing.
Countdown is at 2 minutes.
But his personal passion was space.
I think that our conquest of space will probably be the most important story of the whole 20th century.
Looks like a good flight. Oh, go, baby.
In 1969, a waiting world held its breath as man first approached the surface of the moon.
The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground.
Oh, boy. Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
When that vehicle landed on the moon, I was speechless. I really couldn't say a thing.
It's a measure of the man that he preferred the triumphs of the space program to the despair in so much of the news.
I mean, at a time when there were a lot of other problems in this country and elsewhere, people were downcast. Everybody there was upcast. We were looking toward the stars, looking toward the moon. There was a spirit that was absolutely incomparable.
I hope they put his ashes in an urn and stick it onto one of those space probes when they go up there. I think Walter would feel good just knowing that.
This is my last broadcast as the anchorman of the CBS Evening News. For me, it's a moment for which I long have planned, but which nevertheless comes with some sadness.
His own spirit was unconquerable. After leaving the evening news, he traveled well into his 80s, making documentaries and enjoying himself. He spent those latter years with his true loves, his 3 children, Nancy, Kathy, and Walter Jr., and his wife of nearly 65 years, Betsy. It's said they fell asleep every night holding hands. In 1996, he told us how he felt about the amazing century he had witnessed.
If there's anything I've learned, it is that we Americans do have a way of rising to the challenges that confront us. Just when it seems we're most divided, we suddenly show our remarkable solidarity. The 20th century may be leaving us with a host of problems, but I've also noted that it does seem darkest before the dawn. There's reason to hope for the 21st century, and that's the way it will be.
Walter lived to see one more historic milestone in the American presidency, of course, the election of Barack Obama. Mr. Obama was just 8 months old when Walter took the evening news anchor chair, a young college student when he left.
For decades, Walter Cronkite was the most trusted voice in America. His rich baritone reached millions of living rooms every night. And in an industry of icons, Walter set the standard by which all others have been judged. He was there through wars and riots, marches and milestones, calmly telling us what we needed to know. And through it all, he never lost the integrity he gained growing up in the heartland. But Walter was always more than just an anchor.
Amazing century he had witnessed.
If there's anything I've learned, it is that we Americans do have a way of rising to the challenges that confront us. Just when it seems we're most divided, we suddenly show our remarkable solidarity. The 20th century may be leaving us with a host of problems, but I've also noted that it does seem darkest before the dawn. There's reason to hope for the 21st century, and that's the way it will be.
Walter lived to see one more historic milestone in the American presidency, of course, the election of Barack Obama. Mr. Obama was just 8 months old when Walter took the evening news anchor chair, a young college student when he left.
For decades, Walter Cronkite was the most trusted voice in America. His rich baritone reached millions of living rooms every night. And in an industry of icons, Walter set the standard by which all others have been judged. He was there through wars and riots, marches and milestones, calmly telling us what we needed to know. And through it all, he never lost the integrity he gained growing up in the heartland. But Walter was always more than just an anchor. He was someone we could trust to guide us through the most important issues of the day, a voice of certainty in an uncertain world. He was family. In an era before blogs and email, cell phones and cable, he was the news. Walter invited us to believe in him, and he never let us down. This country has lost an icon and a dear friend, and he will be truly missed.
Walter Cronkite saw history and made it as well. A look at his legacy in a moment.
Hello, everyone. Here we are again in Studio A, our CBS television control point for the Westinghouse coverage, this time of the Democratic National Convention.
Walter Cronkite, who died today, was an eyewitness to so much history, and it turns out he documented a lot of it. Historian Douglas Brinkley has been looking through Walter's papers, and we spoke with him earlier today. Doug, I understand that you are the official repository, if you will, of Mr. Cronkite's papers, and he kept a lot of things, didn't he?
Well, yes, they're at the Center for American History at University of Texas, and he was a pack rat. He donated them to the university because he had gone to school at UT, and they're just boxes and boxes of everything. It dates back to his everything from high school yearbooks and reports to things about the sea and Cape Cod that he kept in recent years. So it's the life of Walter Cronkite.
You're going to be writing a biography about Mr. Cronkite.
That's right. I've taken Walter Cronkite very seriously. I mean, I grew up riveted to watching his broadcast as a young kid, but really for an American historian, he was part of everything, whether he was at Normandy in World War II with the UPI, with Edward R. Murrow in the 50s, the Kennedy assassination moment, Vietnam, the counterculture unrest in the 60s. Cronkite seemed to be at the center of American life.
Doug, I understand that he was opposed to the Vietnam War much earlier than many people might realize.
In his private life, he was very skeptical of it, and he was worried that Lyndon Johnson in 1965 was going to get us stuck over there. He actually, in a speech in Houston in early 65, said that he thought Vietnam was a quagmire and something that was insoluble. This was in a private speech, wasn't picked up by a wire service, so nobody knew Cronkite gave it unless you're in the audience that evening. He gave a similar speech in Buffalo. So there was a skepticism to Cronkite. And if you march from 65 to the big moment in 68 when he comes public, you see year by year him wondering just what the hell are we doing over there?
Do you think that Walter Cronkite realized what a massive imprint he's made on American life, or did he remain a humble man throughout his life?
Katie, because Walter Cronkite was by nature humble, I mean, he never lost that. I think he would say, oh, I'm not all that much. I was a newsman, I hope a pretty good one and a fair one. But in truth, wherever he went, people crowded around him. I love you. Thank you for everything. He was very proud that he was considered the most trusted man in America. And he liked the fact that it wasn't most trusted in an uptight way, that people felt they could call him Uncle Walt. So he knew that he had touched a nerve with the American people, and they flowered him with letters and cards. And this wasn't just while he was an anchor. All the way up in the recent years, Cronkite maintained a huge fan base in America, in the millions. He defined people's lives. People they'd come home from work and turn on Cronkite, and he knew that that was a special bond to keep with the American people, and it was one that he treasured.
Douglas Brinkley. Doug, thank you so much.
Thanks, Katie.
And we'll be right back.
To ensure man's survival in the hostile environment of outer space.
Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American standing on the surface of the moon.
Continuing now with our special coverage of the death of Walter Cronkite. Bob Schieffer is in our Los Angeles bureau tonight. And Bob, I know you were a young reporter in the Washington bureau of CBS News when Walter sat in this anchor chair. What are some of your most vivid memories of him?
Well, I mean, Walter was who I wanted to be when I grew up. I mean, when I was a young reporter, and to get to work for him, I thought it was the greatest honor of my life up until that point. It probably was the greatest honor of my life. The thing about Walter, Katie, was he was exactly off camera as he was on camera. He had this great enthusiasm for the news. He loved the news. He loved to talk about it. He loved to cover it. He had this great curiosity. I'll tell you, Katie, if there was a car wreck and Walter saw it, it would be like the first car wreck he'd ever seen in his life. He'd want to know all about it. He'd want to go check it out. We'll never see his like again, Katie.
And he was a real reporter's reporter, wasn't he, Bob? I mean, a real stickler.
That's right. And not only did he love being a reporter, he liked other reporters. There was nothing that Walter Cronkite liked better than to get with colleagues, newspaper guys, the competition, to sit around and have a drink after a big story or while you were out on the campaign trail and tell war stories. He was a great raconteur. He loved that. And I'll never forget one time we had a party in New York, and all of the anchors of the newscast were there at this party at that time. And I said, Walter, come over here. Let's get a picture of all of you together. He said, well, I don't want to lose my place at the bar here, Bob. I'll be there in a minute.
Oh, I know he'll be missed by you and many others. Bob, thank you so much.
I'm telling you. Thank you, Katie.
Coming up next, Walter Cronkite in his own words.
The Beatles were on American television for the first time, not, as history seems to have it recorded, on the Ed Sullivan Show, but on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. If there's some credit in history for that, I want it.
Walter Cronkite anchored this broadcast for 2 decades, so it's only fitting that the final words tonight come from him.
Good evening from the CBS News Control Center in New York. This is Walter Cronkite reporting.
I think I was a workaholic from the very beginning. It just seems to me I always had 2 or 3 jobs going at the same time. But it was the newspaper work for me. I just fell in love with the darn business. I was still delivering newspapers when I became a copy boy and sometime cub reporter on the Houston Post. I got so involved in the newspaper business, which I loved, and a little bit of radio on the side, that actually I wasn't going to class as much as I should have. I'm afraid I dropped out of college, much to my regret ever since. In 1936, I got a job on a small radio station called KCMO. There came the day at KCMO, and down the corridor came the most gorgeous creature I'd ever seen in my life. An absolutely sensational redhead. Her name was Betsy Maxwell. The spark took. We went together for several years and finally married in 1940. I went off to war as a United Press correspondent shortly after Pearl Harbor. I was 25 at the time.
I'm just back from the biggest assignment that any American reporter could have so far in this war.
It was my first time on camera. I just fell into whatever it is I do naturally. I never took any elocution lessons, no diction lessons. I got a call from Ed Murrow, who wanted me to come to work at CBS. Now that I had a family and a mortgage, I thought, well, why not?
We have just had, I've been advised, some film in from the Defense Department. This is the Explorer as it is being moved to the gantry. Unfortunately, however, the film seems to be upside down.
Flip polarity, flip polarity, flip polarity. Flip your polarity.
Fortunately, the Explorer went up right side up, and we're going to see it that way.
I was assigned to take over the CBS Evening News in the spring of 1962.
This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
Then I thought, why a cold good night? All these famous broadcasters have their catch lines, Murrow.
Good night, and good luck.
So why not have one of those? And a nice one might be, and that's the way it is, because I could say it almost any way.
And that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
And that's the way it is.
And that's the way it is. The Beatles were on American television for the first time, not, as history seems to have it recorded, on the Ed Sullivan Show, but on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
We just hope we are going to have quite a run.
If there's some credit in history for that, I want it.
Good evening from Paris, reporting from Moscow.
I've been delighted that I've been able to be a journalist all my life, from the time I was a boy in high school until today.
From the Great Wall of China, reporting from Madrid.
This is Walter Cronkite aboard the Papal aircraft somewhere over the North Atlantic.
I think it all worked out pretty well.
And that's the way it is.
And that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
And that's the way it was. There will be more about Walter Cronkite on a CBS News special this Sunday at 7, 6 Central. I'm Katie Couric. For all of us at CBS News, thank you, Walter.
This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.